Hello, good evening and welcome everybody. You are here this evening with Kieran Rose and myself from Autistic Parents UK. And just as the slide says, and hopefully just as you're expecting, tonight we will be talking about boundaries, all around boundaries. Hang on a second, sorry, just clicking buttons at the same time. Let's come out of that. So let's do housekeeping bits first. Sorry, talking about tech and my brain went all foggy. Right, housekeeping bits first. So same as it always is, you're welcome to turn your camera on if you want to. If that's something that makes you feel comfortable, that's absolutely fine. But please do keep your microphones off because it's really weird when you're speaking and then you can suddenly hear a dog barking and it takes me ages to work out that it's someone's microphone or somebody chatting in the background. So please do keep your microphones muted. We really appreciate it. But chat will be monitored. I will be stopping and checking the chat and interacting with the chat. What we did last time, and it genuinely made things much easier, is that absolutely chat amongst yourselves, chat around what we're talking about or anything else that takes your fancy, that's absolutely fine. But if you've got a question for Kieran, can you put question preferably in capital letters at the front of your comment? And then when I just skim through the chat, it's really easy for me to see which bit's a question and which bit is a couple of people who found each other in the comments box and are having a nice little chin wag or sharing experiences or anything like that. It just makes things a little bit easier. So yeah, if you can put question in capital letters, that really, really helps.
And if you have a criticism, put it somewhere else that we can't see it.
Right, I certainly only speak English. Do you speak any other languages, Kieran?
A little bit of German.
There we go. So just don't put it in English or German. Just pop it in another language and then you can insult us as much as you like because we won't know. I was going to say I only speak a tiny bit of French. I do, but I do know quite a lot of swear words. So yeah, don't pop French insults in the chat either because I'll probably pick up on them too. We did rejection sensitivity last time, so definitely none of that. Look, now you've got people commenting German in the chat box. That's purely for you. I don't speak any German at all. No, a lie. I will tell you my one German sentence that I know, which I was taught by a boyfriend when I was about 15. Ich liebe dich, mein kleiner Kartoffel. Here we go. That's it. It means I love you, my little potato.
Oh, I didn't know the last word. There you go.
Yeah, yeah. Apparently it's like a thing, like pop it.
All right.
Term of affection. Yeah, term of endearment. There we go. So
anyway,
let's come to boundaries rather than German.
What can we do before we get there?
So it's just more work for me.
For us, isn't it?
If I get too waffly, I'll just chop it out and I edit. I thought we could start off literally just with what is a boundary and what isn't a boundary.
So, I mean, a boundary is very, very simple. It's a fence. It's a division between you and another person that you erect to say, this is my space. Don't come in it, basically. Or, this is my thinking. Yours doesn't match with mine. Let's keep our views apart. Or something like that along those lines. We use it in terms of kind of relationships. So a boundary might be if somebody comes up to you and asks you something, you have the ability to say no, and they respect that. Sometimes boundaries can be put up that aren't respected as well. So, but we'll get onto that. And what isn't a boundary is basically you walking in saying, these are my needs and everybody must meet them. Or these are my wants and everybody must meet them, regardless of the impact on everybody else. That's not what a boundary is. So there is a distinction between those three, and there is a lot of confusion. And I don't really understand why there is confusion about those things, but there is a lot of confusion about them.
I'd agree. I see, particularly online, because online is such a contentious and online space. People feel happier to say things that probably they wouldn't say face to face in real life, of people acting like rules and threats are boundaries, and they're really not. In fact, I seem to remember some heinous celebrity male actor who said that his partner wasn't allowed to post any photos of themselves on Instagram and just said, well, that's a boundary for me. No, that's a rule and a threat and not a boundary.
Was that a comedy actor by any chance?
It was a comedy
So I
actor.
think
Yeah,
that
I
is.
just didn't want us to get in trouble by naming who it was.
I
Um,
was narrowing the field down, but yeah, I think
yeah, the
yeah.
fact that said girlfriend was actually a professional surfer, so almost her entire Instagram was pictures of her on the beach in beachwear. And he said she wasn't allowed to do that anymore, and then claimed that it was a boundary. It's definitely not.
His therapist had told him that that was a good boundary as well, which is
Right,
really
right.
problematic.
But I think it is just that genuine not understanding of what a boundary is. Whenever I talk to people about it, it's just as you say, the number one thing with a boundary is that it's about you, not about them. A boundary is exclusively about what you will accept, how you will behave. It's nothing to do with them other than, this is my boundary, and if you can't respect it, I will leave. But there isn't anything else in with that. It is just, there's
That,
the fence.
yeah.
That's where it lives. I'm making it nice and clear. Yeah, excellent. What would you say is a common or maybe just a really helpful boundary for autistic parents?
The ability to say no would be a wonderful boundary that I'm sure many of us struggle with. And that doesn't mean saying no to everything, but saying no in a way that keeps you safe, whatever that might mean. So I have a particular problem when people come and ask me for help that I will give that help without any consideration to whether I have the capacity to give that help or the energy levels to give that. So it will be detrimental to me. So I need other people to support me with that boundary sometimes, accountability partners and things like that. So yeah. So I think probably that's the immediate one that springs to mind. I mean, there are millions, aren't there? But that's the one that immediately springs to mind because I think that's something that many of us grew up not being able to do, not being able to say no. I think if there are people who are PDA in the audience, that might be a very different narrative for you because that might be something that was a thing. But again, for some PDA people, not. But I think for the common or garden autistics, those of us who don't experience that, saying no to people is mixed up with confrontation and conflict, and and it's very much part of kind of trauma and masking narratives as well. Not being able to say no and giving people what they want from you and helping keeping people safe by keeping them nice for you kind of thing, so they treat you nicely and don't stigmatize you. So it's all wrapped up in so many different things.
Yes. Yeah, I think we spoke about it last time as well. That So my personal experience, but speaking to other autistic people as well, all of that people pleasing stuff, it gets wrapped up with hyper empathy as well, because if you are very, very in tune to other people's emotions, potentially more in tune to other people's emotions than you are to your own, you actually can't bear people being angry with you or people being upset or people being disappointed, because it causes you basically physical pain to be around somebody who is expressing a negative emotion to you. So it can be really easy to let any boundaries just be trampled on because it feels safer and better to say yes and have someone be happy with you than it does to say no and have to deal with that disappointment and negative emotion
And
towards.
I think a common experience, particularly for autistic women, is that sometimes they find themselves partnered who experience that inability to say no, and sometimes then find themselves partnered with someone whose anxiety drives them a very different way, and they do end up in that kind of coercive, controlling kind of thing, and then
Yes.
you have a dynamic which is incredibly problematic and ends up in kind of abuse. And sorry if that's triggering for anyone, but it's a very common experience, unfortunately, in relationships. So
Very much so.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it can be massively detrimental to your mental health, your physical health, your well-being, in every kind of way, shape, or form. Your financial health sometimes,
Yeah.
and it all comes from growing up and not having agency. And not being supported to have any agency. Like I grew up in a household where no was not a word that was allowed from children. And that wasn't because my parents were evil, horrible people. That was just the hierarchy that was within the household. So I
Yeah.
think that's something that a lot of us have grown up with, and then it's really hard to discard that. It's really hard to kind of stop being like that because it's trauma.
Yeah, right. It's what you learn. And I think it can lead into that disconnect from your internal self and not trusting any of your own instincts or any of your own internal experience. And so even when there is a part of you saying, this new person that I've met is displaying lots of red flag behavior, actually that feels safe, that feels home, because it feels like everybody else in your life and everybody else that you've loved treats you like that. So you think that that's how it's meant to feel. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we've kind of ended up touching there as well on why boundaries are really important, because they can keep you safe in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting actually because a little while back, I and some co-authors published what we called a healthy guide to autistic relationships, which was touching. It came out of a study that we did on intimate partner violence, because there was no literature out there whatsoever about what healthy relationships look like for autistic people,
Right.
or even, what red flags might exist, how to spot them, how to retrospectively go back and find them and see them, and pick those apart and use that as a tool to move forward with. There was nothing, literally nothing. So it's just terrifying how little information, especially as someone who's maybe a newly identified autistic person who goes onto Google and taps away and starts looking for things. Once you trawl through all the rubbish that's on there, there's actually so many gaps in information there, of stuff that's life-saving
Yeah,
effectively.
absolutely. Yeah, and that yeah, it's that kind of people pleasy dynamic, as you say, it's so common and it's so kind of what's the word I'm looking for, like insipid, like it kind of sneaks in there,
Yes.
right? And you can very easily not realize that you're in a deeply unhealthy relationship because you don't argue,
Mm.
and you both seem quite happy on the outside and things all seem settled, and it's because one person is having their needs completely met by the other person to the absolute detriment of that second person, who believes that their needs are the first person's needs and
Yeah.
that there isn't anything else going on. Yeah.
And I
So if
think,
we, oh, go on,
sorry,
carry on.
I was just going to say it, and I think, without being very binary around kind of gendered experiences, I think the gender expectations that are around women and how girls are brought up with those expectations, we still live in an age where women are quietly expected just to do all the housework and also have a full-time job and be the mother, and like those things still are very, very prevalent, even though they're not spoken about, and men get a pat on the back when they do the hoovering now. Those things are still very, very real, and I think that feeds that narrative of it's usually the woman who's the one who ends up sorry, excuse me, who ends up kind of meeting the needs of the male partner. Now, that's not all the time, obviously,
No.
but that dynamic is the prevalent one. And I think that very much plays a part in that as well. It's a kind of, there is a typicality of autistic women who lean into that expected gender role because that's what's expected of them. And that's how that
Right.
mask kind of exists. So you just carry on masking in the home.
Yeah.
It's,
And there can be cultural elements as well. We had a webinar on Tuesday with Sophia. Every time I get the vowels in my head, it will not tell me the correct one. Sophia, from SEMA, and she was saying that one of the reasons that they can struggle to reach carers within Black and brown communities is because they don't recognise themselves as carers, because there is this big uh, cultural expectation that it's actually just the duty of wives, of daughters, of sisters to look after the rest of the household, and so they don't see themselves in a caring role. They think that that's just what it is. So within that kind of dynamic, it can add that extra layer in, that if you've also got an intimate relationship that's just laying on more of just ignore all of your needs and just take care of my needs.
Yeah.
It can add an extra layer in. Yes, yeah, absolutely. So we touched a little bit there about you know, what a boundary might be and why it's important to set up. If you are either it's a long-term relationship and you want to set a new boundary up, or it's a boundary that you hold for everybody, but it's a new relationship. What kind of wording could you use? Is it best to do it in writing? What would you do to set that boundary up?
I think they're very two different contexts. Firstly,
Okay, that's fine. Wait, let's do it in two
I
parts
think
then. So
I
do the first one, old
do the first one.
relationship,
So
new
a new
boundary.
boundary in a long-term relationship. Oh, um, I mean, obviously the context of a relationship is important, and who that relationship's with, and what relationship you have with them already. I mean, I've got relationship with friends and colleagues and things where I haven't had to put boundaries in because they've just naturally occurred. Because and I think that's people being respectful of the dynamic between it. So first of all, there's an equity to the relationship there that doesn't require the naming of boundaries; they're just known. But secondly, I think in old relationships, sorry, they have boundaries have the potential to blow up in your face. Because the other person might be the sort of person that doesn't respect boundaries, or doesn't like boundaries. It can change the dynamic of a relationship. Not all the time, obviously, but it is quite a common experience that you put boundaries in place with people, and then all of a sudden you're not as accessible as you were before. You don't meet the other person's needs as much as before, and then all of a sudden that becomes a problem. And that's sometimes how relationships end. And I'm talking friendships as well, not just like intimate relationships. So I think it's really important to really consider the person firstly, and consider how things land with them that are maybe negative or feel negative. You know, how rejection sensitive they might be, or you know, how much of a person are they that kind of dominates you as well in some respects. And I don't necessarily mean that in a really, really negative way, but maybe they're just a big personality. So putting in a boundary with someone like that might be problematic. So really kind of think about who that person is. If it is a person who you know it's going to blow up, then I would question the value of that relationship anyway. Because if that's going to cause such a huge thing that it's going to be an enormous division in your relationship, then I would say that person's probably not respecting you in the first place. That's made more difficult if it's a family member, but I'm sure we'll get onto family members in a bit. If it's a new relationship, that's like a whole different thing. And I think with both of them, with the older relationship, again, it depends on the person. So you could write something, you could kind of lay that out. I mean, I've got friends who I know have lots of problems in their lives, and they need someone to be able to kind of info dump those problems out. And that's absolutely fine. But I've kind of make it clear that I will read everything that you send me, but I might not have the spoons to respond to it. And it's enough that they know that someone's read it, you know? So so there's a boundary there. That's a small boundary. In a new relationship, I think that's easier to do. I think it's if you can get the confidence to be able to say, actually, these are my needs, and is this okay with you? And if it's not okay, that's fine. Relationship doesn't go any further. You know, but obviously you've got to battle there with your own sense of rejection and things like that, and your own worry about conflict. But reframing this as a way to diffuse conflict, especially in a new relationship before it even happens, is a way of kind of getting over that fear of conflict as well. Because if we don't say anything now, something might blow up in the future. So we're mitigating that, and we're doing damage control before the damage has even happened. Which in a way, it's sad that you have to talk about relationships like this, but in another way, it's really healthy. Because
Yeah.
you are establishing the parameters of that relationship, and then nobody at a later date can turn around and say, well, you've gone outside the parameters of this relationship, because
Yeah.
you haven't. You've established it at the beginning. So having that out front, and I think that's something they should be teaching this in schools.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that so much rubbish about relationships is done in schools and sex education. Like so much unnecessary stuff is done, but actually the really, really important stuff like boundaries and consent are not done whatsoever, and they
No.
should be.
Yeah. Yeah, consent was going to be one that I touched on in the context of info dumping. So I have a couple of friends that I will message and say, have you got the spoons for me to do this? And if they say no, then you go, no probs.
Mhm.
That's fine. But just asking for the consent first, because for most of us, right, it's a bit up and down as to what we can cope with on a given day, and we might be absolutely fine, or we might be like, actually, I haven't got the headspace to do your stuff on top of my stuff, and I love you, but no. But yes, I think consent can be quite a healthy
Yeah.
um
And I think
factor of boundaries.
we have this in our professional relationship as well, because sometimes one of us might ask the other a question and then we get really excited and it's like 4,000 words later, or a 10-minute voice note later, or something. So that's a slightly different thing though, isn't it? Because then there's almost a loose, that's I think was what I was talking about earlier, that kind of loose expectation that things might happen, that you know, that Ruth knows that you can read something that I've written or not read it and come back to it at a later date, and I won't be offended by that, because we have those parameters between us and we've talked about this stuff.
Yeah.
That open and honest dialogue is really kind of important to any relationship, whether that's work, whether that's friendship, whether that's whatever. And until you get that, all you're going to have is problems, because
Yeah.
you're going to be guessing what the other person is experiencing.
Right. And yeah. One of the things, so when you were talking about new relationships, now I've talked about this in my peer support groups, and I don't think I've talked about it in the Q&A. So please excuse me and tell me if I've talked about this before in the Q&A. So I don't think I have. But it was something I came across online a little while ago. And they were saying that when you are setting up a new relationship, so they were talking specifically about meeting people on dating apps, but actually I think it applies to anything. Early on in the relationship, say no and don't give a reason, and about something really minor. So they were saying, like, if you're arranging to meet somebody and they say, oh, can you meet me at this cafe? Just say no and don't give them a reason, and then see how they respond. Because if they respond, oh, no probs, can you do this cafe instead? Green flag. And if they respond, well, why not? That's my favorite, blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
Red flag. And it gives you a nice little early indicator of, is this going to be somebody that respects my boundaries, or is this going to be somebody that consistently prioritizes their own needs and tramples over things that are potentially quite important to me, because you just haven't given a reason, you've just said no. And I actually thought it was quite profound. Like I'd never thought of doing something like that. And I thought, that makes life so much easier as to who do I carry on this friendship, this relationship, this business relationship, whatever it is. Do I carry it on with this person, or do I say, okay, thanks?
It's really good advice. Okay, I've got to come back to that. What happens if you've got two people who are like, no, you choose. No, you choose.
Yes. So I see, for me, this would come to honesty again, and it would be, okay, the reason I don't want to choose is because, so for me, it kind of depends. I normally will suggest a place because I've got loads of food allergies. So if I'm meeting a new person, I'll say, can you meet me here? Because I know they can feed me and give me coffee that I can drink, preferably coffee I can drink that doesn't taste of coconuts. That would be great.
No.
Oh, but so few places will make their coffee out of it. And Alpro recently changed their oat milk to start containing gluten. Who does that?
What? Why?
Right, it used to be gluten-free and now it's not anymore.
That doesn't make sense.
I could have the rest of the webinar about this, so we're just going to move on.
We've got some questions, I think, in the chat.
But so if people get a bit like, oh, you choose, I'll be like, no, I will choose. But I think just that honesty of, why don't you want to choose? Are you worried about my reaction? I don't want to choose because I don't know the area very well, and I don't know what price range you're comfortable with,
Yeah.
or I don't know if you smoke and you need to have, do you know, like all of that.
It's just choice paralysis.
Yeah, just ask them. Just like, this is getting weird. Why don't you want to choose? But yeah, so for new relationships,
Good advice.
I think it can be easier, and I do really like that little taster of is this going to be somebody. But I think for older relationships, should we go, I tell you what, actually, before we go any deeper, there has been a question come in, so we'll go to the question rather than
There's been two, Ruth, actually.
Oh, okay, let's do the one higher up. Yes, Emma and Tracy. Yeah. So we come to Emma's. I was trying to get PSHE into my daughter's EOTUS, and I want to find someone who does this for autistic girls. Oh, that's a fab question. Do you know somebody who does something like this for autistic teenagers?
Emma, drop me a DM.
There we go. Is that all right, Emma? Thank you. Marvelous. And then Tracy's a little bit lower down. Sorry, I've just lost my arrow. Sorry.
Also, just sorry when you get that. Emma, I don't mean in the chat here. I mean, drop me a DM outside of this.
Is that okay, Emma? Let us know if that's a problem. I can click little linkies and things onto Kieran stuff.
I think Emma knows how.
How do you get your boundaries understood and respected at work when they are viewed negatively, such as not doing small talk, social events, lunches, having door closed, etc.? I find it is a battle and it is draining to keep explaining to manager, etc., and feel they aren't listening or understanding.
This is hard because this is an empathy problem.
Yeah.
And if someone doesn't have empathy for you, it's sometimes quite difficult to get them to have empathy for you. So, and especially in a working environment where someone has power, and it sounds like this is someone who maybe invokes their power in a hierarchy. So, all of that makes it quite problematic. So, I think the first thing, unfortunately, is to maybe lean into the fact that this person might not ever respect your boundaries. That is obviously a very strong possibility. But following up from that, I think what Roosh just talked about that open and honest dialogue, it might be that the person might need help understanding why you struggle with these things and why you need these kind of boundaries, because they might not understand. So, the whole point of the double empathy problem is that there are people who experience things that other people don't experience, and therefore it's really hard for anybody to know what that means and what that feels like. And so one way to bridge that empathy gap is to help someone to understand what it is you're experiencing. That's giving examples, analogies, maybe something that's relatable to their own life about things that they might find difficult, things like that. But the way you've written that, I keep coming back to the point that maybe this person doesn't really want to hear those things, and that makes things very, very complicated. If it is draining you, obviously it depends where you work and stuff like that. If it's the type of organization, if you're working for a small organization, it's probably less likely. But if it's type of organization that maybe has an HR or there's somebody above the person that's managing you, that you can kind of go around them rather than try and go through them, or get the help that you need from them, that is a possibility, but very much depends on your context. I don't know if you've got anything to add there, Ruth, because that's a really difficult one.
It's really hard, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's that exactly as you say, it's the expectance maybe, or that they might just never get it because they don't want to get it and they aren't interested. And then, as Kieran said, whether you can go above their head and so the changes happen anyway, that's marvelous if it can. If not, then is the working environment still viable if you just have to keep reinforcing your boundaries? Is it likely that they'll get it in the end and that you can just carry on and maybe it's a bit sticky in the meantime? Or is it this person is never really going to get my boundaries, they're going to keep stepping on them because they're not really interested in me as a human, and so maybe I need to look for another workplace that gets it? That sounds really harsh, and I'm sorry if it comes with an element of privilege, because of course it depends what your job is and how easy it is to switch, because sometimes it can be really tangly and hard, but it can just be that way up of how hard is it to stay here versus how hard is it to leave. And sometimes we just get little marvelous miracles and the person leaves and then a fabulous person comes in and your job place all becomes really, really marvelous. But again, do you have the kind of job place that has fairly quick staff turnover? And so we've got the chance that boss who doesn't want to understand is going to leave, or person has been here for 18 years and is going to hang on till retirement. And so unless you get promoted above them or leave in a different direction, they aren't going anywhere. It's that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, difficult. That's
Yeah.
the thing, and I think this really comes back to the fact that we are right at the very beginning of something which is going to take decades, if not hundreds of years to resolve. So our experiences are going to be the measure by which future versions of us are going to look back and think, "Oh, glad we didn't live then." But the work we do now is gonna benefit the people in the future. And I think that's part of recognizing the fact that this is a civil rights movement, and unfortunately, we are going to have these problems, and these problems aren't always resolvable.
Yeah.
We can't always improve our situations. We sometimes need to take sideways steps. Sometimes we need to take backward steps. Sometimes we can take no steps at all. So that's horrible to say, and I hate saying it, but it is the cold hard reality of the world that we live in at the moment, that there is so much out there which is against us.
Yeah.
And so many barriers in front of us, and often those barriers are attitudes created by people, and they're unnecessary, and they could be easily dismissed and moved and taken away. But unfortunately, the world is not ready for that yet, and that's what we're working towards, and that's every day that like many of us are fighting toward. All of us are fighting towards, in our various different ways. But at the moment, unfortunately, sometimes that's just the cold reality, that it's crap and it's horrible. And sometimes the best that we can do is just be here and be a shoulder and listen.
Yeah. And I would say that, so that was the next thing that I was going to come back to, was with family members particularly, or other long-standing relationships where it can be hard to establish a boundary, or if you do, even if you actually use all of the magic words to establish your boundary fantastically, you've got people who aren't going to respect it.
Yeah.
But equally, you aren't in a place where you can just go, okay, bye, I'm off then. Because lots of us are reliant on family members or friends for physical support, financial support, practical support, emotional support, whatever it is, that even though there are elements of that relationship we find really tricky, we can't just close the door. And it's one of the things I like about APUK really, is because we constantly live in this grey space.
Mm.
And I find a lot of online spaces just do the whole, well, just cut them out. We can't
Not
always
possible
do that,
always.
can
No.
we? We can't always leave the horrible job. We can't
No.
always walk away from the unhealthy relationship. We can't always stop communication with family members that we find challenges with, because it's the reality for us for lots of reasons, but it's particularly reality for us as disabled people.
Yeah. Very simplistically, it's choice, but within context, it's not. It's not always a choice at all. It's a privilege. So those two things are a little bit different,
Right.
it's, you can make yourself even more unsafe by coming out of the unsafe space, can't you? So it's yeah, rock and a hard place, and that's kind of why I said what I said, that hopefully one day we may not benefit from it. I hope we do at some point, but future generations of us will hopefully benefit from us having these conversations and the changes that we are trying to invoke in things. But things happen on such a glacial level that it's going to be a long time before there's meaningful change for any of us around anything like this.
Yeah. And some, I think
Depressing.
with boundaries, with that kind of thing, where it's, the boundary cannot be when these things happen, I walk away, that's
Yeah.
the end. The boundary can be much smaller. So things like, I need to have my office door closed, but my boss just wanders in and opens the door. Your boundary can be, every time you wander in and open the door, I will close it again. I will close my office door every time it gets opened and someone isn't actively walking through it, because it goes back to you again. You can't control him or her or they. You can't control them, but you can say, I'm just going to close my door every time. Every time somebody has small talk with you, you walk away as soon as it's polite to do so. I realise at work it is an unrealistic boundary to just go, no, no small talk.
That's where you work.
But as soon as it's polite,
my
to
boss is
just
terrible, so
it kind of depends what your job is, doesn't it? I think lots of my jobs have been customer service, where it would definitely not be okay to just say no every time someone does small talk with me. No, I don't know.
when I was much younger in between jobs, I had to go and join an agency, and like I got sent to all sorts of random places, being on the front desk of places, and it was the most horrific experience of my life that I would never want to repeat again.
Yeah.
Literally because I couldn't tell people where to go.
Yeah.
And like I said, now my boss is terrible and I tell him where to go all the time. So
Yeah, well, it's much easier when you're self-employed. Just as the add-on, it's Tracy has got a union involved. Fantastic, which I should have mentioned. Yes, unions also fantastic for helping to uphold boundaries.
when
But
I see them work for a local authority, now I understand. Yeah, probably the most ableist places that you can walk into, unfortunately.
really hard, aren't they? I think all kind of government places, they like the words,
Mm.
but they don't like the reality. Yeah. Um, Excellent. Oh, oh, thank you for responding about the light. I'm just catching up, guys. I'm just seeing if there's any more actual questions in there. Excellent. Okay, that's fab. That's fine. But yeah, so bring it back to yourself. What could make it manageable for you with any of those? If you've got a family relationship as well, that it can be really hard to put your big boundaries in place with and have them respected. What little boundaries can you put in to make it more manageable for you?
When it's family members, obviously it's much more difficult. Well, sometimes it isn't for some people, but I think it is for many people. Having boundaries with maybe parents or siblings or whatever who are a huge part of your life and who you might love dearly, but are also maybe emotional vampires, sucking all the energy from you and who have grand expectations of all the things that you can do for them and don't ever really do anything in return. And so yeah, so those are problematic things which many of us experience. Probably again, going back right to the root of our conversation, most of those behaviors by other people are anxiety driven, and those controlling kind of behaviors usually come from there. Um, and if we're neurodivergent, we're dealing with neurodivergent family members as well. So all of those kind of being mitigating factors, but sometimes you can't cut someone out of your life. That's the drastic, and that's the kind of probably the place that none of us want to go. But sometimes some of us are pushed to that extent of no, that's enough now. But really, if you can't do that, then and you can't apply boundaries that that person's going to respect, then you have to start looking at yourself and what boundaries do you have with yourself rather than the boundaries that you put in with other people. So if you know that someone has a negative impact on you, can you limit the amount of time that you spend with them or the frequency of the time that you spend with them? If for example, it might be a parent who is problematic. So, can you put a boundary in place whereby your children don't have to interact with that person? Like if it's a grandparent or whatever, so that at least you're putting a barrier between the grandparent and the children so that the impact isn't felt there. And I think that's really kind of the best way to kind of manage that is to think about, well, if I do have to spend time with this person, I know what the effect of that's going to be. So I need recuperation time from this. I need someone to be able to offload onto because that's a problem and so on and so forth. So even if you can't go the whole hog and remove someone from your life, you can still manage that to an extent, dependent on your privilege. It's, as someone from who has a family that has no childcare support, but yet has potential childcare support living 200 yards away, in the form of an in-law, who is the universe revolves around them, shall we say? This comes from a place of if that person was out of our life, it wouldn't make a tangible difference to us in terms of whether we had someone to look after the children so that my wife and I could go out, but the negativity every time they come is palpable. So we go there, or I and my wife go there to visit there and keep them away from the child as much as possible, and so on. So it's just those. It's going to be unique to each person, and there's very very privilege related, because some people might need that child support. So
Yeah.
so putting in even the tiniest of things can actually feel like big things. They can feel like big wins, and they can give you the confidence to do more as well sometimes. And sometimes it's literally just about how do I hold the wolf at bay? Um,
Yeah.
like literally that's it. You're picking up the flaming torch and you're waving it at the cave mouth. That's all you can do. Um, and yeah, it's just really, really, really privilege based, and it's about just what you can do to protect yourself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, sometimes it's really tiny stuff of I have to see this person all the time. So I'm just going to sing songs in my head the whole time that they're with me because that makes it bearable. I think that's another thing which you were kind of talking around there, is that you don't always have to communicate the boundary to another person. It can just be something within yourself. And sometimes, particularly if you've got a contentious relationship or relationship where one party is fiery and it could lead to conflict that you don't want or you struggle with, you don't have to. You can just, if you are saying to yourself, I will never see this person for more than an hour, and that is practically possible to do, you don't have to tell them that that's something that you've decided. You can just keep it within yourself. I decided a few years ago that I wouldn't see my family en masse, that I like all of my family, mostly. I like all of the family that I see, but I don't like seeing them all together. It changes the dynamic and I find it very, very stressful. And everybody gets weird and the people talk at strange volumes. And so I just don't. I just see them one at a time. But I've never told any of them that I'm doing that. I just don't go to stuff that they do together. I'm always busy. And I see them individually because
There's
that's
even,
easier.
I think that's so important. I'm like, that's literally my family. We don't come together anymore. I think we all put that boundary within each other as well. It wasn't just a them problem; it was an all of us kind of problem. And I think that dynamic changes, doesn't it? And sometimes that dynamic changes you without you even realizing as well. So there's always a part of this which is reflecting on yourself as well, and
Right.
around kind of what you're bringing to this kind of context. Um, because not everything is everybody else's problem. Sometimes you are a little bit
No,
yourself as
no,
well.
that's what I don't like who I am
Yeah.
when they're all there together.
It's exactly the same with me. I had I think I might have mentioned this last time actually. This is like I use this as a therapy session now. I used to have a big issue with when I was with my family, and my wife was with me. I would become so anxious. I would kind of start saying comments that were like making fun of my wife and things like that, because that would kind of help prop me up. And it's really problematic. And it's something I've actively worked to stop doing. But literally, it's because my anxiety levels were so high. I felt like I needed to position myself and have someone in front of me, kind of thing, as a safety net,
Yeah.
or as a barrier. And the way that I could do that was by making her feel small, which is awful, awful behavior. So, I had to put boundaries in with myself in order to stop myself from doing that. And that's really, and part of that was not coming together with family like en masse like that anymore, because it was just too dysregulating, too overwhelming, and that was how I melted down to an extent.
Right.
So I think it's really, we really need to kind of reflect on what these relationships make us into as well, and the impact that has on the people that we do love and don't want to have boundaries with us in that are negative. So I think it's really important to do that. The other thing I was just quickly going to say before I forget is sometimes you can actually constructively put boundaries in things like tech. So WhatsApp, you can turn red reports off, and Facebook Messenger, you can do that too. So if there's someone who doesn't have boundaries with you, like literally turn off your red receipts for everybody, so you can respond in your own time. You can make the choice about when you respond. And it's not your problem if someone is demanding an immediate response for you and you don't give it. That's a them problem, not a you problem, unless there's an emergency. So even little tiny things like that can just take that little bit of pressure off of you.
Yeah. Stephen Fry talks about it, that the invention of the telephone has brought about this era that has never existed in human history, where you're demanding immediate contact with somebody,
Yeah.
but we don't have to agree to it. We can just say, no, I'm not immediately contactable. Um, I'll yeah, we'll come to the question. I have an older sister who has addiction problems who I don't hear from a lot. However, when she does, it is intense. I'm trying to put in boundaries at the same time due to our closeness and childhood growing up and my fear of something happening to her. I really struggle.
That is so hard. I went through this with my dad, who was an alcoholic, um, and who actually stopped drinking in the last 2 years of his life, just stopped. So all that dynamic absolutely shifted, which I think was quite unusual. But my experience of addiction is that when someone is causing you a problem, it's not your problem to fix them. So sometimes if someone is causing that much a problem in your life, actually the healthiest thing you can do is remove them from, like, have no relationship with them whatsoever, because although you feel responsibility for them, you are not responsible for them. That doesn't mean support people. That doesn't mean don't support people. It doesn't mean don't help people. But if they are having a detrimental impact on your life, then it sounds like you've already put that boundary in place, and by having that distance and not seeing them consistently all the time, I think that's an important thing to do. But if it's still having a real detrimental impact on you when you are with them or you are connected to them, then I would seek support from that externally that isn't from like looking from immediate family. Maybe someone who's neutral, where you can go and kind of relay what's happening. I don't mean a therapist; it could be a friend, it could be a whatever, but just someone where you have a safe space, so that if you do continue that brief but intense kind of interaction with them, that you've got somewhere where you can go where you do feel safe, and that you can talk to someone or who holds space for you. Not even if they can give you advice, just to hold space for you. Um, and I think that's such an important thing to have, because it's at the end of the day, addiction is a disease, but it's a disease that's experienced by someone who isn't you, if you are a sibling or a parent or a child or whatever. So it's important that your safety is prioritized in that relationship, because you can't do anything to control what they do.
Mm.
So yeah, so that's such an awful and difficult situation. I'm sorry that you're experiencing that.
Yeah, yeah. Living with people who you love who are going through addiction, it is really, really hard. And I think unless you're talking to others who've also been through the same situation, a lot of the general advice out of there is not practical or helpful. Or I have seen recently that David Gray Hammond is setting up something specifically around autism and substance use. Now, I'm not sure if it would provide support for the loved ones of people experiencing substance abuse, substance misuse, but that might be a good place to start
Yeah.
and see if that kind of external support would be helpful.
I think it's more of a research focused group, but that's not to say that they might not be able to signpost. And David Gray Hammond's writings on this as well, because he's
Yeah.
experienced addiction himself, and he's written extensively about it. Is sometimes even, what we were talking about earlier about having empathy, and about understanding someone's context. Maybe having a little bit of insight might be useful. And I think it's just really kind of hopefully validating, when I say this, that prioritizing yourself will feel like you are letting the other person down. But the important thing to remember here is, that twee analogy about putting the oxygen mask on yourself first before you help others really, really applies here more than it would in any other context, because that person can take you down with them.
Yeah.
Like literally take you down with them. It is, you can still love them and not be in a relationship with them, and that doesn't mean that that's a permanent state of affairs either. Some people with addiction go off, clean themselves up, help themselves, and get to a point where they're safe to come back into a relationship again. So you not being there to support them doesn't mean that you are letting them down. Sometimes when, another twee thing, when you love someone, you've got to let them go so that they can come back again. And sometimes that's very much the case. And it's really important that you do prioritize yourself here.
Yeah. Yeah. There's quite a bit, isn't there, around if you keep saving someone going through addiction from the consequences of their own actions, they're very unlikely to
Yeah.
reach a place where they're realizing the consequences of their addiction and potentially coming out of the other side of it. And you can't save somebody who doesn't want to be saved.
No.
That they have to save themselves, and it's rubbish and it's hard, and it does mean that yeah. But I would just say from experience, you can't save people who don't want to be saved, and saving them from the consequences of their actions can actually prolong it a bit and make things hard for you.
And I think that's something that's even more difficult to deal with when you are the type of person who maybe is a bit of a rescuer, who is like the patron saint of lost causes. So the person who takes in the strays and the waifs and wants to look after everybody, and which is all potentially part of that people pleasing narrative again, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. Because it
that,
feels marvelous
yeah.
to have somebody very reliant on you, who you are aware and they are aware that even their basic needs are being met by you. For a people pleaser, for a hyper empathetic person, actually that feels really good. And again, that's quite a tough confession, right? But
Mhm.
it does.
Yeah.
Feels great.
Yeah. And again, I think that brings us back to the point of, often boundaries are pointless unless you have boundaries with yourself, and
Right.
unless you are really reflective about who you are and what you do and the impact of who you are and what you bring to relationships and things like that. It's really important that you challenge yourself around those things as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you do end up in that position where maybe where you're looking after someone and you're doing it because it feels good. So you're not doing it for altruistic reasons. You're doing it because you're getting something from that as well. It's a transactional thing rather than a love thing, isn't it? Sometimes. And so yeah, so being honest with yourself around those things is really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just coming through to lovely. Uh, excellent. Okay. So lots of lovely comments come in. Thank you very much, Bobby. Yeah, absolutely not your problem to fix other people. Bobby's also said, same here, UK family are cut out, American family has the time and support for us, but sadly they're no longer alive. We were better and are better without the UK ones. Yeah. But it's just that extra nuance within that we aren't always in a position to just cut people out. Sometimes we are, and it can be healthier to do that. And sometimes there's got to be a bit. So it's then just, what do the boundaries look like for you? Yeah.
I think there's the flip reverse of that as well. You know, Ruth, I was literally just thinking about this as you were saying that, that sometimes other people might cut us out.
Oh, yes, let's do that one. Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking like I was randomly thinking about this in the context of, so I was thinking about this today actually in the context of social media, that I had someone who vicariously came to me through another person to ask me to unblock them on Twitter.
Oh,
And I know why I blocked that person on Twitter, because what they were doing and what they were saying was having a negative impact on me, and I found it problematic. So I was protecting myself.
yeah.
So for that person to come through another acquaintance to kind of ask was a complete violation of my boundary. So thinking about that, and I'm sure there are people that have I don't only know people who have cut off relationships with me, but I certainly know people who block me on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and that's just part of the course sometimes of doing what we do. So I have to accept that there are people who want to put in a boundary with me.
Mm.
Sometimes that happens in real life as well. Like I say, real life outside of social media and in our interpersonal kind of interactions. So sometimes if that happens, maybe then that's, rather than railing against that boundary or that cutting off, that's an opportunity to reflect as well.
Yes, massively, isn't it? Because ultimately we can't control other people.
Mhm.
You have to accept that even if you don't agree with the reasons that they did it, or you don't know the reasons that they did it, they must have had a reason, and it stings like a mofo, and it may well keep you up at night, bother you massively, need outside therapeutic help to move past. But the important thing is to keep respecting it.
Yeah.
People are allowed to stop communicating with you, even if you don't want them to.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's hard, isn't it? Because particularly for a group of people for whom friendships are difficult and probably have been historically difficult, where maybe you've had friends and then turned out they haven't been friends or they haven't treated you well and things like that. So it triggers all of those memories, doesn't it, about being rejected and excluded and all of that. We're back to rejection sensitivity again, aren't we?
oh, right.
But it's a part of this, isn't it? That so it brings up all those big feelings and those historical kind of feelings. But at the end of the day, somebody else's choices aren't something that you can influence at all. And you might feel like you are the kindest, best, most wonderful friend in the person in the world, and other people's perceptions of you might not be that. And
Right.
that's, so
Yeah. I think it's also that acceptance, and it can be really hard, but the acceptance that your reality is your reality and nobody else's. So your reality might be that you are a marvelous person and a really, really good friend because you know all of your intentions, you know all the invisible stuff that you did, you know what was going on inside your own head, you know whatever you define as being a good person and a good friend, and somebody else doesn't know that, and their perception is not the same. And it doesn't mean it's not true, it just means it's not the same. And it's that whole thing of impact being greater than intent. You can only know your intent, they can know the impact. And so all of us will inadvertently hurt other people.
Nobody knows, and nobody owes us an explanation as well. That's the worst thing. You're not owed an explanation by anybody about anything, in the same way that you don't owe an explanation to anybody else. And that sometimes can be difficult to sit with when, because it's an injustice, isn't it? I think so.
Yeah.
It feels like an injustice anyway. Um,
Yes.
not the not knowing, the not understanding, the not being able to comprehend what's happening, and having no agency over it whatsoever. So that's anxiety inducing and triggering and all of the things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it is uh work through it in whichever way working through it looks like for you. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of ironic, isn't it? Autistic people telling other autistic people that they have to accept stuff and move on, right? Which is just the worst
Yeah.
thing for us to try and do. Um, but but as you say, people don't owe us an explanation. People don't owe us their time. People don't owe us the opportunity to apologize or explain. And it means you don't owe it to anybody either. It goes both ways. And in some ways, actually, having people very firmly enforce a boundary with you can make it easier to enforce boundaries with other people, because it kind of lets you know that there's social permission to do this stuff.
Yeah, it's acceptable, and that's the thing. And actually, that leads me very nicely on something I was going to bring up, which you might even have a question about this, because I don't know what the questions are. Is about modeling this to our kids as well.
Yes, yes, I wanted to do a bit about the kids. Go, let's do some modeling. Yeah.
So, do you want to start, or
Oh, no, I was just going to actually, my question about kids was about upholding boundaries with your kids, but I suppose that overlaps, that by upholding boundaries with your kids, you are also modeling how to uphold boundaries.
just with your kids? Yeah. So our children, quite like us, need to be taught what boundaries are and need to understand what boundaries are. So it's just, I think all I really wanted to say on this was it's important that we place in boundaries with our children and allow our children to have boundaries with us as well. Uh,
Right.
that's usually the bit that people don't do.
Yeah.
We're very good at saying to our children, no, you can't do this, or no, this is my time, or no, whatever. And actually, we take all their agency away from them by not allowing them to have boundaries with us.
Mhm.
So yeah, and that's something that most kids will struggle with, having boundaries with them. And then, like, but the modeling of that is really important, and the dialogue around it as well, helping them understand what boundaries are, why they're important, why we have them. And for a prime example from me, because I am incredibly touch averse to the point of pain, but my children need hugs. So I want to give my children hugs, but it hurts me when I do it. So I have to have boundaries with them to say, okay, dad can't take any more now. So you have to step away, you have to get off, you have to move away, and then, like, we'll have another hug tomorrow, or whatever, So having that bound, and that was difficult when they were little and toddlers and babies, and not knowing what this meant, but literally the repetition of hug, 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 step away now, kind of thing, or me leaving the room, or whatever, and explaining to them why I was doing that, even before they could probably really understand what I was saying, or understand what my context was. Just doing that and getting to that habit of doing it has helped them then establish boundaries with me, which has been a hard pill to swallow sometimes when your kids have boundaries with you as a parent. But it's really important that they get that opportunity, because we weren't taught these things. So we
No.
have to break that cycle, that generational trauma, and make sure that they're equipped with skills that we don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it is that two-way street is so important. I was talking to somebody a little bit randomly at a home ed group a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about physical contact with their kids, and that's it. I was saying it's okay to say no, but you have to open up a two-way street. If you're going to say no, you have to accept it when they say no too, because that's a healthy relationship. And as you say, with the constant explanation, I love you, you're marvelous. I actually love physical touch with you in the right context.
But now
Uh,
fuck off. In the nicest possible way.
but right now, oh yeah, yeah, or I do it because you need me to. Um, but right now, I
Yeah.
can't cope with it. So if I blow you a kiss and I say I love you, but we can't be doing that right now. But then when they say, no, mummy, stop hugging me, I don't want kisses. Oh, both of my boys, particularly, even my younger boy, has for a very, very long time, pretty much as soon as he could verbalize it, don't kiss me, no kisses. I'm allowed to sniff him, but I'm not allowed to kiss him. So I can go right up to him and go, and that's fine, that's permitted, but they're not allowed to look like kisses because that's banned. So that's
Yeah.
fine. We just go,
Yeah.
okay, kisses are banned.
That's the thing. It's like I've got three children. They're all very, very different around this, around their needs around this. Like the eldest is quite aloof, but manifests every so often, and then there's just an out of nowhere kind of hug, which is quite terrifying. Um, and so he has to cough very loudly or something to make me aware that he's there, so that otherwise I don't have a heart attack and turn around and punch him in the face accidentally. My middle boy is just like we call him the slug because he's constantly wrapped around somebody. And then my youngest is very much like yours that you've just described there, kind of, like things happen, but they happen on their terms in their way. And that's been less hard for me to deal with than it has been for Michelle because Michelle was a really huggy person, my wife. So for someone who wants to be wrapping their arms around someone all the time, and actually she can do that with me because she's the only person that can touch me without it hurting. But with my youngest, it's the she's like physically holds herself back. It's quite comical and quite sad to watch as well at the same time. Because it's really difficult for her not to go in. And
Right.
and I think there is a humanness in that some people need to touch other people constantly and all the time. But then it becomes problematic, doesn't it? I remember
Yeah.
my youngest is ginger with like orphan Annie kind of curl hairs. Or doesn't so much now, but very much did when they were younger. Now it's mostly shaved off. Um, but she used to have a teacher that constantly used to be touching her hair, and we had to keep going to school and saying, "Stop, don't
Yeah.
do it," because at the time she's sitting there with her forced grin on her face, and then she comes home and cries for an hour. So
Yeah. No, that's one of mine. I actually mostly I quite like touch, but I don't like people touching my head. And I really don't like people touching my hair. You know how people are like, oh, I just love to have my hair combed for hours. So one of
no,
the reasons that I mostly have short hair is because I hate people touching my hair. I have to find a hairdresser I trust, and then I can cope with hairdressers as long as I like them. But no, that's one of the ones with my kids where I'm like, no, don't touch my hair. And they learn really, really early on, don't touch my hair because I really don't like it. And I will just recoil every time because it's just, oh, no, it's not nice. I've had
that's making
partners
my
and
skin
things that
crawl.
are
So
really into like, oh, I'll just run my fingers through your hair. And again, very quickly, not romantic, not sexy, absolutely not. No, don't
this is
touch my
why I don't have any hair.
hair. Right? Just go, no, no, not going to do that. Yeah, see, painful. I agree, Victoria. It's painful. I just don't like people touching my hair. My son prefers to be punched on the shoulder. Yeah, see, it's that kind of thing, isn't it? That you just there can be that physical affection, and it's just about what does it look like for you? How is it okay? Yeah, yeah. Uh, Oh, right. Bobby's the same. Definitely don't touch my hair, Kiana. Oh, this is nice. Thanks, guys. This has been very affirming for me. It's not just me. He's like, oh, not my hair, though. Most things I'm
It's
okay,
like,
but
like, but this is like I joke about being bald and not having any, but this is why I cut my own hair because I can't even tolerate the hairdresser coming anywhere near. Like
yeah,
it's, and I know that's my touch averseness is beyond just hair. It's like everything. Um, But I think even if I didn't have the skin issue, I still wouldn't want anybody coming anywhere near my head or face. That's a
No,
real vulnerability, isn't it? And
yeah. Yeah, with scissors, right, as well, coming near your head with
yeah,
scissors
sharp
or
object.
razors.
Yes.
Like there's no, and they quite often, when you've got longer hair, they can be quite rough with it. And because it's their job, they don't think about, yeah, but you're pulling my head. If you pull me hard enough that I have to move my head, that's too hard. Don't do that yet. And Bobby also does her own hair. Yeah,
You
see,
find
very
yourself in that position and you have the confidence, I would recommend yelling "ow" really, really
I
loudly.
get, as I currently have a very nice hairdresser, so as long as she doesn't leave, then I'll be fine. It's when they leave or they do something that I find objectionable, and I have to go and find new ones. Normally, you can tell when I'm between hairdressers because suddenly my hair's much longer and much messier than it is normally. It means I'm spending 6 months trying to find somebody I can bear talking to again. Um, Excellent. So there's a few other comments coming, but no more questions. And I did want to be a little bit more cautious with timing tonight. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time as ever, Kieran. Thank you to everybody who commented.